Okay, so we are going to finish chapter 21 today. We already went over natural selection. We already went over genetic drift. Today we're going to start off with gene flow and go over a few different mechanisms that influence evolution. So starting off with gene flow, this is the movement of alleles among populations. This is going to be from immigration and emigration. I'm going to skip down to number 3, the third bullet point there. So gene flow tends to reduce genetic variation among populations over time. So these alleles, they keep moving randomly, but only the fertile ones are going to stay in that community. If they are not an advantageous trait, they may not stick around, okay, because that person might not be reproducing, but maybe it's just something different. Maybe, people haven't seen whatever it is, this trait, and that person becomes, quote unquote, attractive. So in that case, maybe a less favorable one could stay around. But overall, guys, it reduces genetic variation because it reduces the chance of speciation. So gene flow reduces the chance of speciation. Let me explain to you what speciation is. Speciation, we have a population of whatever. Let's say it's, chipmunks or something like that. So what can happen over time is the group of chipmunks can actually divide into 2 different populations of chipmunks. They might start off as the same species, but as these 2 different groups start to go through natural selection, they can actually form 2 different species over time. If we have gene flow, it will increase genetic variation a little bit, but overall, we're not going to have speciation. And if we have speciation, that really gives us a lot of genetic variation. All right. So the less gene flow, the better chance that we will have speciation, that we will have a population go into 2 different species. People continuing to move around the earth, that's one of the main things that has increased gene flow. So 2 different things with gene flow. It can decrease the fitness of a population. This is our first one we're going to go over. So there's a little example on the Netherlands. So we have, and I'm going to come back to this slide. I'll read the bullets for you guys. But we have a species of birds. All right. So what they did was they came to an island from the mainland. And they went to 2 different areas. They went to the orange area, which is central, and they went to the eastern area over here. Okay, so let me go back. Some of these birds decrease the fitness of the birds that are already in these island populations. So when they came over from the mainland, they started to decrease the fitness of it. So in the eastern population, just in the eastern area, natural selection was able to act on these birds. So when we're talking over here at the green area, natural selection acted on the birds that came over from the mainland. However, I'm going to go back again, in the central population, they had such a high immigration rate that it was so overwhelming, this influx of birds, that natural selection could not happen quickly. So it would have taken a lot more time. Because they were bringing over these unfavorable traits, again, natural selection only happened in the eastern, but not in the central because of the overwhelming amount of birds came in. But look here, because we had these decreased fitness alleles come in, the survival rate of the birds, whether they were eastern birds or central birds, if they were in that central population, it decreased. But the eastern population, where natural selection was occurring, it increased, all right, because natural selection was weeding out those unfavorable genes. Gene flow can also increase the fitness of a population. We talked about insecticides previously in this chapter. We talked about the DDT. Here's one with the West Nile virus. They use insecticides to try to kill a lot of the mosquitoes carrying the West Nile virus. However, some of these mosquitoes had alleles that actually were resistant to that insecticide, those mosquitoes reproduced. Those mosquitoes carried on those insecticide-resistant alleles, and those alleles then become more prevalent over time. Okay? So, like I said, guys, gene flow, it could be positive, increasing the fitness. It could be negative, decreasing the fitness. But overall, it does result in evolution. All right, so last section here, guys. So section 4. So we're going to start off going over adaptive evolution. So this is going to be an increase in the frequency of alleles that improve our fitness. When we talk about things like happening, I know it says new genetic variations arise by chance. When we talk about by chance, anytime you guys see by chance, what we're talking about is random mutations. Now, we talked about mutations. We have a lot of mutations. Some mutations are going to be good. Some mutations are not going to be good. But overall, mutations is how we get new alleles into our population. So when we have these new alleles in our population, that's when natural selection acts on these alleles. Some of them stay, some of them leave. All right. If it leaves, it was probably an unfavorable mutation. If it stays, it was probably a favorable one. Okay. So with adaptive evolution, when we get these alleles that improve fitness, most of the time it's going to be by mutation. Okay, so natural selection brings about adaptive evolution by acting on an organism's phenotype. We kind of already talked about the mutations last slide. So mutations can bring about new alleles. Now, all mutations are not going to change the alleles. And if they don't change the alleles, they're definitely not going to change the phenotype. Some new alleles that might come into a population, they might even be recessive, so they might not even be seen for a few generations. But overall, we can have a change in our phenotype. So, 2 phrases. We're going to go over relative fitness here, but before we go over that, struggle for existence and survival of the fittest. These are 2 ideas of natural selection. When we talk about struggle for existence, we're not talking about, like in survival of the fittest. We're not talking about like 2 members of a species like fighting. Okay, it's not like that. What it means is they are literally just trying to survive given what they have, given their adaptations, given their alleles. All right, so I don't want you guys to think they are actually, fighting, competing, and doing that type of thing. So relative fitness, this is the contribution an individual makes to the next generation. So a gene pool. We have a gene pool in a population, well, let's just say. And we have different gene pools in every single population. Now, they're going to be relative to that individual species, but each species will have its own gene pool in a particular area of the world. So if we're talking about us, we are going to have some kind of fitness that we are going to contribute to that gene pool. Now, I'm just going to let's use the Asian community, okay? Obviously, black hair is probably going to be the most prominent thing. So if we look at their gene pool, they are going to have a lot of alleles for black hair. Now, when we're talking about relative fitness, most of them are going to contribute the black hair alleles, all right? So that's going to keep their gene pool fairly consistent throughout the whole, thing, just because so many individuals already have black hair. But let's talk about different organisms. Let's not talk about humans, all right? You guys know a liger. A liger is a male tiger mated with a female, a male lion mated with a female tiger. That's a liger. So the liger, when it is created, which is obviously only in captivity because lions are from Africa, tigers are from Asia. There are a few lions in Asia, but not many. They're very few and far between. But the liger is sterile, meaning it cannot reproduce. If it can't reproduce, there's nothing it can contribute to the next generation. So its relative fitness would be 0. So if any organism is sterile, its relative fitness is going to be 0. All right, so we're going to go over 3 different modes of natural selection. First one is directional selection. So directional selection, I'll show you the graphs here in a minute. It favors of individuals on one side of this graph. It may not favor the most fit individuals. Let me give you guys an example of this. Let's go to the Galapagos Islands and let's use Darwin finches again. So let's say all of a sudden, all of these seeds and stuff, they're just gone. For some reason, I don't know, there's a drought. The seeds aren't able to be made anymore. All the nuts that those big beaked birds make are gone. What might happen here is maybe the little beaked birds are the only ones that can find food. If those are the only ones that can find food, it's actually going to shift our graph to favor a smaller beak. That's directional selection. Okay. Disruptive, the second one, this favors individuals at both extremes, but not in the middle. This will give us members with completely different phenotypes. It's like white cats and black cats. They're going to both continue to produce and be reproduced. You know, they're going to reproduce over and over again, but we're going to have 2 completely different phenotypes. Last one is stabilizing selection. This is where our middle area, what it's going to do is we're going to favor that middle area. So that middle area, the part of the graph, is the peak will get higher and higher and higher. Okay. Let's say cats may have like 6 kittens. But I'm just giving an example, but like some cats might have 6 kittens, some cats might have 3. This kind of stabilizes out the population, all right? We could think of fish too, like fish, if you're a really, really big fish, you're gonna get caught, right, from fishing. If you're a very small fish, right, it might be harder for you to find food, things like that. So we're actually going to favor that middle area for fish. All right, here's your 3 graphs here. Okay, you guys can see the first one with mice. We had an original population here for color, and now the evolved population, which is the dotted line, this is directional selection. It is favoring a darker colored mouse. What this tells us is the population probably changed. I'm sorry, the environment probably changed. So the environment got darker, so the best camouflaged mice would be, you know, that color right there. If they're really light, they are not going to blend in, and they'll get eaten. Disruptive, if you look at the 2 mice here, this tells us there might be different environments they live in. Maybe this one lives on the sandy beach. Maybe this one lives a little more inland. Okay. The last one, the environment is all this color. So anyone that's not blending into that exact environment is getting eaten, which is increasing the population of that mouse. So in our adaptations, guys, through natural selection, through mutations, all these things, we have gotten some crazy adaptations. You could find a lot of weird ones online. If you've ever seen Natural Geographic's World's Weirdest, there's a whole series about weird adaptations some organisms have. Some lizards actually shoot blood out of their eyeballs as coyote repellent. All right, but other things, octopi, they can actually camouflage. They could change their color. Snakes, they can actually dislocate their jaws in order to swallow large things to get them down and start the digestion process. All right, I really do not like snakes. One thing I don't like. All right, so we already talked about this one mostly, guys. Mutations can arise and occur in any population. What we do is natural selection edits and weeds out some of these mutations. If they're good ones, we'll keep them. If they're bad ones, they're not going to stay in that population. Okay. Okay, we're good here. All right, next thing is called sexual dimorphism. So sexual selection, this is pretty much mating success. Now, sexual selection will result in something called sexual dimorphism, meaning our two different genders, our two different sexes, will start to have their own individual characteristics. An example of this, men to women. Men, you're going to have a larger Adam's apple, a deeper voice, all right, facial hair, things like that. Those are examples of sexual dimorphism. Animal kingdom, think of like peacocks. The male is very pretty, has all this plumage. The female, yeah, she doesn't have all the nice brightly colored feathers, unfortunately. Okay, so intra and intersexual selection. So intra, what this is we are going to have a competition. Usually it's the males competing to get the female's attention. We will then have intersexual selection. This is usually going to be females. They're going to be choosy of, hey, okay, do I want this male or do I want this male? So just because a male is going to be the one that, maybe wins the competition between the other males, that doesn't mean the female actually has to accept that male, It's almost like the old kind of thing where the bride is chosen for the groom and the bride just kind of submits, all right? It's not always like that. So we talk about good genes. Now, I put good genes in quotations there because good genes aren't really the best genes all the time, or they're like neutral almost. We'll talk about neutral in a minute, but it's kind of funny how things change. Like, go back a long time ago to 1970s. This, having a very large mustache, a whole lot of chest hair was like, ooh la la back in the day. But now things have changed a little bit. Not a lot of guys just have the real thick mustache. That's not considered attractive anymore. So these good genes for making these very thick mustaches really aren't considered the good genes anymore. But in reality, these genes really don't matter. They're not increasing the fitness of that individual. Here's another one with frogs. Different mating calls. They found that this one over here, okay, they call it the LC call. It's a longer call. And then the SC call, which is a shorter call here, they found that when they did the study, that the females actually preferred the LC one. Now, was it beneficial? Yeah, maybe a little bit, because they actually had a larger child. Larval growth is better. And the time of metamorphosis getting from tadpole to frog was actually shorter. So some of the things that might not be, a big deal, like this one here, okay, he can croak a little bit longer, do that frog call. It doesn't seem like a big thing, but maybe it does influence other things. All right. Neutral variation, genetic variation, it does not confer a selective advantage or disadvantage. This is like the mustache thing that I just went over with you guys. So, diploidy. This does mean diploid. That's all it means. So, if something is diploid, you guys know, remember genotypes, okay? We had 2 alleles for each genotype. If something is diploid, that means it could be homozygous dominant, it could be heterozygous, or it could be homozygous recessive. Now, we're going to talk about the heterozygous ones right now. So, balancing selection. 2 different forms of this we're going to go over. The first one is heterozygous advantage, and the second one is frequency-dependent selection. So, let's do heterozygous advantage first. This is when, if you are heterozygous for any particular trait, you actually have an advantage over the homozygous dominant. So let me use sickle cell anemia as an example. If you have sickle cell anemia, you're not going to be carrying oxygen very well. So in your blood, what happens? The cells are sickled and they can't carry as much oxygen as a regular blood cell. If you are homozygous recessive, you have sickle cell anemia. If you are homozygous dominant, you're good. Everything is good. However, if you are heterozygous, meaning you have one dominant allele and you have one recessive allele, this is a heterozygous advantage because not only do you not have sickle cell anemia, but you're also resistant to the malaria disease. So, kind of nice. And malaria is just another disorder that it's a blood disease. It was caused by mosquitoes. It kind of had the same symptoms as the flu. If you let it go long enough, it can actually be fatal. So that's not good, right? Here is the prevalence of sickle cell anemia in Africa. So you guys can see it's more localized around the middle region there. Now we're finding that those numbers are actually starting to decrease. One reason is because of gene flow. All right. Next one, we're almost done here, guys. Frequency-dependent selection. This is when the fitness of a phenotype declines if it becomes too common in a population. So let me go over an example of this one. So we have some fish, and they have their mouths actually slightly angled. So they could be angled to the left or they could be angled to the right, but they're not in the center like ours are. So some are going to be on one side, some are going to be on the other. Why? Well, the fish that they use to eat, and they're not actually eating the fish, they are eating the scales, the dead scales off of the fish. But this fish is obviously swimming to the left of our screen here. The fish that are going to try to eat the scales are going to be on each side of it. If we had all of them with the right mouth, meaning they are going to eat from the left side of the fish, that only lets one fish eat off of that big orange fish there. So we want them to have pretty much equal amounts in this population of right and left mouth, so that way we can use two fish to eat from each one of these fish. And it's kind of nice, it's kind of a symbiotic relationship because the orange fish up here is getting rid of all its old scales, and these fish down here are getting a nice snack. All right, so why natural selection cannot fashion perfect organisms? You would think, okay, if we are going through evolution, we should be perfect, right? Exactly suited for the environment. Here is the limitations of natural selection. So number one, selection can act only on existing variations. What this means is that if there is not the most advantageous trait right then and there for this individual, we don't have it to even act on, okay? Maybe they'll get better over time, but we have not gotten to the zenith of our mountain with these variations yet. We still have room to grow. We have historical constraints. Again, same thing. We don't have all of our variations yet that can be the most advantageous for us. Right? Adaptations are often compromises. Think about this. If we had the biggest individual, think about humans. I mean, this guy is just, let's say, gigantic. He is 8 foot tall. He is huge. All right. Obviously, he could beat up anyone he wanted. He could take any food he wanted if we lived in like the caveman society. However, would he survive long? Probably not, because his body would be so big that his organs wouldn't be able to handle a body of that size. Okay? So, yeah, big is good, but you're definitely not going to live that long. So, chance, they're talking about like natural selection there, and the environment interact. As the environment changes, what natural selection acts on also changes. So we kind of have to adapt to the environment. All right, guys, so that is the end of chapter 21, work on your reading guide, and I'll see you next time.